When we think of vampires, we think of New Orleans, but the Appalachian vampire is the original American vampire. Now, what people don't understand is in the 1900s, there were Romanian immigrants who came to the Appalachian Mountains because it reminded them very much of the Carpathian Mountains. And they brought with them this lore of vampirism. Now, this story comes out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There was a girl named Kira. Now, Kira said that she happened to be downtown one night with her friends and they were at this nightclub. She said, she was dancing, having a good time, when out of the corner of her eye, she spots this man standing by the bar. And she said he had this beautiful curly brown hair and he had bright blue eyes. And she said, he was just like almost perfect looking. Well, she said, when she was dancing with her friends and she was talking with him, all she could do was focus on this guy. Eventually, she said something was compelling her to go over and talk to him. So she walks over to this guy and she goes, "Hi, I'm Kira. How are you? Where are you from?" He doesn't say anything. She keeps trying to talk to him, but he's not speaking. So she goes, "You don't really talk that much." And this guy then proceeds to grab her hands. And she said when she felt his hands, they were ice cold. And as she looked upon his eyes, she said there was this blank stare. And she said it looked like he was empty inside. And right at that moment, she has this vision of a woman screaming, and this guy is chasing her. Well, all of a sudden, she kind of snaps out of it and she backs up a little bit and is kind of freaked out now. This guy looks at her and says, "What do you think of me?" And she says, "Well, to be honest with you, I think you're a little creepy now." And he goes, "I'm sorry. I'm still trying to learn to be human." And she said the next thing she knew, like she felt something telling her to go outside. So she started to like walk out the front door. She goes down the road and she goes into this back alley. This guy follows her out. She said this guy came up right next to her, and next thing she knows, she's kissing this guy. And she said it was getting very passionate when all of a sudden he starts getting very aggressive. And she said he was grabbing her arm so hard he could feel the nails going into her skin. And she said, at this point she became terrified and started freaking out when she hears her friends say, "Kara, like, are you all right? Is everything okay? Like, what's going on?" She turns, she takes off running to her friends. She's all frantic. And she says, "This man I met at the bar, like, he was trying to attack me out in the alley." Her friends just kind of look at her like she's crazy. And she's like, "What are you, you don't believe me? Like, there seriously was this guy." And they're like, "Kira, you were over by the bar alone. And you were talking to someone who there was no one there. And you walked out of the door alone. And you walked into the alley alone. Like, there was no one with you." And she's like, "No, what are you talking about? Like, he was there. He's real." And her friends are like, "Look, you've had too much to drink. We're going to take you back home so you can get some sleep." So she said she went home and she started to think, maybe it was me drinking too much. Like maybe I just imagined this. Until she goes into the bathroom and she sees these scratch marks on her arm. Now, this next story takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. There was this man named Marcus. Now, Marcus said that he grew up in sort of a bad part of Atlanta. And he said, he was in a lot of trouble and wasn't on the up and up. Well, he said this particular night, him and his group of friends, they're hanging outside of their house. They're listening to music. And he said it was probably about 11 o'clock. So that's when all of a sudden it just got eerily quiet. And he said the next thing he knows, they see this white guy walking down the block. They said just something seemed like really off with him, but also like this looked like a guy that wouldn't be in that neighborhood. So normally they would go up to him and they'd be like, "Hey, what are you doing in this part of town?" and call him out and stuff. But they said they felt like they were in some sort of trance. And this guy makes it all the way to the driveway. He turns and he walks right up to them. And Marcus said he stopped, right next to him. And his eyes were fixated on this one guy who they called Shorty G. And they said this whole time as he stood there, he just was staring straight at Shorty G. Well, this guy walks over to Shorty G. He taps his face and he says, "It's a nice night, isn't it?" And he turns and he walks away. Well, after this guy leaves, Marcus and his friends are kind of like fighting amongst each other. Like, "Why didn't you say something? Why did you let him punk you? Like, what's going on?" And this whole time, they said Shorty G is just standing there like something was bothering him, like he was terrified or he had seen something. And he said, the rest of the night, Shorty G didn't say anything. And then finally he said, "You know what, I'm going to go home. Like, I'm going to leave. I'll catch you later." So he walks back to his house. And the next day, they're getting ready to all hang out. Shorty G doesn't show up. So they go to his grandma's house. They knock on the door. And the grandma's like, "Shorty G never came home last night. I thought he was with you guys." And they're like, "No, he said he was going home." For 3 days, they searched for Shorty G. They couldn't find him anywhere. And he said after about a week, they realized he was probably gone. And he said, at this time, they did not call the police. They handled things on their own because they did not want the police in the area. So he said he never heard from Shorty G again. Now, this next story takes place in West Virginia. There was this girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her grandmother came over from Romania. And she said she remembered this family story that when her grandmother was younger, her brother was unalived by someone and they never were able to figure out who did it. And she said they buried him in a local cemetery. Fast forward many years later, they said, that they wanted to bring this case back up and they'd found some new evidence. So when they went to bring up the body, they could not find one. And the grandmother said they never found out what happened to him. Well, fast forward now, her brother's daughter at the time, she now has a daughter. And her daughter was like 9 years old. Well, she's at home one night and her daughter goes into the kitchen and she said she sees this man standing next to the kitchen table. And she said he had a brown hat. He had this brown jacket on with some, 70s looking jeans. And she said the guy looked at her and said, "Don't you recognize me? I'm your grandfather." He turned and then walked out the back door. Well, she runs into her mother's room and she's screaming. And she starts telling her mother, like, "Hey, someone was in the house. There was this guy and he was in the kitchen." And her mom's like, "Well, what did he look like?" She starts describing him and instantly she starts crying because she goes, "That was my dad. That was your grandfather that you've seen." And her grandmother always said that in her country, they believed that sometimes people would come back from the grave and they called them vampires.